Hi everybody, I'm going to be making another star cuff tutorial. You'll see here that I am stringing 30 beads to begin my bracelet. That is going to be 20 of the crystal clear beads and 10 of the purple connector beads. These purple connector beads are a sort of frosty purple, and I will be using a different purple, but I will make that clarification later. It doesn't really matter, so do whatever you want. But again, you need 30 beads. That is the only way in which I know how to properly make this work. It is big for some people's wrists. It is big for mine as well. But I find that if you just tighten this string, it works just fine. Like if you just pull pretty taut, it should work just fine. Here I'm knotting off that single, and I do knot several times just because I don't want my stuff to break, especially if I put it up on Etsy and it goes to somebody else. After I finish knotting as many times as I'm inclined to, I pull the longer side of my string through one of the purple connector beads so that I can begin my first row for my X base cuff. Also, I'd like to make a note that if my hands or the cuff go out of frame, I promise you are not missing anything. I am just pulling something tighter or switching my grip so I can show you something better. But you aren't missing anything important. Nothing is being done while my hands or the cuff are out of frame. So to start, I am stringing 3 beads, and I make sure that the one in the middle is distinct. And I am moving from connector bead to connector bead. And that's what makes this easy, and that's why I do make those middle beads pretty distinct. It just becomes a lot easier, and you'll see it makes this cute little triangle here. This is one of the purples that is different from the original one that I used. Again, it doesn't matter. It's just a personal preference. If it gets too complicated, just use the same color. It doesn't really matter. I just do it for a little bit of variation, but you know. So you're going to string these little triangles from connector bead to connector bead around the entire bracelet. And here I am going to string my last little triangle right back where we began. And then I'm going to also string it through the first triangle, a blue bead, and a purple bead as well, sort of in a diagonal direction. And this is so I can start my second layer of my X base cuff. And from here, you're just going to do the same thing that you just did. I am using the original purple again, so that it will match because of the pattern that the X base makes. Again, if it gets too complicated, just use the same color. It doesn't really matter. I always pull everything pretty taut. Oh, see, I'm pointing out that these kind of match together, but you know, again. I pull everything pretty tight just because that's my personal preference. I feel like it gives your candy more structure and it makes it seem stronger, but do whatever you feel inclined to do. After all, it's going to be your cuff, but this is just the way that I prefer mine to be. So you're going to thread these throughout the entire cuff again, and then I'm going to thread my last one again right where we began, and I'm going to begin my third and last row of my X base cuff, and this is the very beginning for our star cuff again. So again, I'm threading my last little triangle, and I'm going to pull through one of the blue beads and another purple bead from the very first triangle we made from that row. This is so I can start another layer, and for the last layer, I will be going back to using a pair or pairs of these crystal beads that you see at the very top of the cuff that I started with. This is just so we can close everything off, create the cuff in itself, and then start on the points of the stars. So again, you are using 2 of your starter beads. These are the crystal clear ones for me. And you are just pulling through from connector bead to connector bead. You'll see that I used that different purple because it's like a different purple for the X. Again, not really necessary. So I'm stringing my last pair, and from there that marks basically the end of your X base cuff, and now we can really get started. So you're gonna end on a purple connector bead, but you're actually going to string it through the corresponding or the following pair of crystal beads next. I know I said that we typically go through connector beads, and that's true, except for this cuff, of course, naturally. So from your pair of crystal beads now, I'm going to string 11 beads onto my strand of, string. And these are going to be the very beginnings of my points, my star points. And so you'll notice that the first 3 beads are matching with the same beads that I used for my original cuff. You don't have to do this. This is just the way that I learned it, and I think it makes it look more cohesive. Again, that is 11 beads, and the 6th bead is the middle bead, and that is one that I personally make more distinct, or I make it stand out. So you're going to be going 3 purple beads diagonally and then pulling through a crystal bead pair. That's basically the way that I think about it. I pull these pretty tight because these are going to be my points, and I like things defined. Again, you're coming out of a crystal pair, and you're going to string your 11 beads. These alternate directions going up, down, but you are still going 3 diagonally and then stringing through the crystal clear pair. So again, you see me sort of counting, and then I go through the pair that comes after the purple bead I counted last, not before. And so I didn't speed this part up just because I want this to be really clear in case my explaining is not that great. But again, you'll see that I did use those same 3 colors on the first 3 beads. It's just a personal preference. I like it a lot, but you can do whatever you want to do. You're going to have 5 of these points in all for your star, so if you don't have 5 points, which sometimes it happens, or 5 strands, that likely means that you didn't get 30 beads on your original single that we started with, so make sure that you do have 30 beads. That is incredibly important for your star to end up looking as it should. So you can kind of see our star starting to take shape. It looks a little bit like a flower right now, but it'll become more defined later. And I'm on my 4th little strand right now. These colors come in handy later, especially the 6th and middle bead, if you like to do a sort of extra cute little border thing that I typically do. I think it adds more dimension and color to my candy star, and I will show you at the very end of that, so, don't fear. And now we're threading our final strand. Again, 3 diagonally. And your string, I find it hard to become confused because your string, typically it really does end up in the direction that you need it to be. So you're just going diagonally in the direction in which you came out of. Don't worry about twisting or turning it or anything. So here is my star shape. Looks a little funky right now. And now I'm going to be beginning the points. So I came out of the last crystal pair that I threaded my last thread through, or my last 11 bead strand. And now I'm going to be making the points. I'm using the same 3 colors that I used for the first 3 beads of my strand. Again, I just like things matching. I feel like it makes it more cohesive. So you're going to pull through the 4th bead, completely ignoring the first 3 beads, and you're going to come out of its same counterpart on the other side of the strand. So you'll see that I entered in through the bright blue neon bead, and I'm coming out of the bright blue neon bead on the other side. So I'm ignoring the first 3 beads on both sides of the 11 bead strand. And for my points, these colors are the only colors I will be using. So you'll see that I'm skipping a connector bead, a crystal pair, and a connector bead to pull through the next crystal pair. Again, we are pulling through a crystal pair, not a connector bead, so be aware of that. And see here, I have made my first distinct point. I think it looks so cute. I'm really happy with the colors I picked, actually. So shout out to whoever asked for more contrasting colors. I really like this color scheme, and I probably wouldn't have done it, like, by myself. I remember distinctly when I was first making these, this feeling like a really big jump to make, to like put these beads in, but it starts to make sense later. Like, it doesn't feel as confusing or big. It just becomes more like, it becomes easier. You kind of start to get it. And I feel that when your star starts to come into shape, things just become easier. Like, it kind of lays itself out. And so when you come out of the other side, you're just doing the exact same thing. But yeah, 3 beads on both sides to make your point. And again, you are making a jump, and you're skipping 1 pair of crystal beads and going through the next one. And that's what I was referring to when I said it seems like a big jump, but it makes everything look really cute and perfect. Again, I didn't really speed this up just because I want this to be made very clear. And my first tutorial for this was on TikTok, and you only have 10 minutes, which it seems like a lot of time. And by the time you're done filming, it is not a long time. So hopefully this is more comprehensive. And I got all the angles and stuff right. I'm new at this. I'm new at the YouTube, TikTok, like, actually putting out content thing. But I am wanting to get, like, more involved as somebody part of the community, Kandi community. You know, I hope one day to be, like, one of the greats, you know, somebody who's kind of, like, known a little bit. Here I am fumbling my string. Happens to the best of us. I'm having a hard time sometimes figuring out what angle I need to hold this at so that you guys can see, but also so that I know what I'm doing. It's definitely like an awkward balance, so shout out people who kind of know what they're doing already. I do not, but hopefully I will get better when time comes. And technically, after all of these points are made, you could call it a day and be done with your star cuff. I mean, the shape is there, you're pretty much good, but I typically make an extra little border around my star cuff, and I will show you that in the video. It's just a personal preference, and I like the way it makes my stars look. I feel like it makes them have a better shape, and they're less, like, bendy and weird. But again, that's just a personal thing that I do, and I know some other people do it. And so that's what I'll be showing you. But again, you don't have to once you're done. Technically, right here, you could pretty much just tie your star cuff off and be done with it. You know, it's all there. But instead of tying off, I'm going to take my string from where I last put it through, and I'm actually going to thread it into the original X-base cuff that we started off with until I hit one of those translucent purple beads that are in the middle of the X's. And this is where I'm going to be starting my little border, for lack of better terms. I really don't know what to call it. But here I am, I'm wanting to hit one of these beads, and those are the only beads of the original cuff or the original X base that we will be using to make this border. And here's where that 6th and middle purple bead that's sort of sticking out like a sore thumb comes into play. I'm using these cute little dark purple roundels, I think they're called, and I'm stringing 9 of them. And from there, after I've done that, it kind of takes a while. These are a little irritating to work with because of how small they are. I'm going to thread that string through one of the pearly purple middle beads that I have right there. It doesn't really matter if you approach threading this from an upwards or a downwards direction. Whatever you start with, it doesn't matter, but be aware that you will have to alternate. So if I go through at an upwards direction like I just did, it'll come out in a downwards direction, and that is sort of how my pattern will go up, down, up, down. It becomes obvious though, so don't make it too complicated, don't overthink it. You just, the string knows where it's supposed to go, so don't twist and turn or do anything about that. Again, I'm threading 9 of these roundels from the part where I pulled it out of, the 6th and middle bead, and from that 6th and middle bead, once I've strung these roundels, I'm going to pull that to the next corresponding translucent purple bead that is part of my original X base cuff. So that one right there. And you'll see here that once I pull it tight, you don't have to pull it tight. I actually loosen this a little bit. It's just whatever you want to do. You'll see how it kind of comes in at a little twist, it goes up and then down. And it does make a cute little extra point around the star. And again, you can actually use any beads that you want. I typically use just the regular size beads that I, used for the rest of the bracelet. But I wanted to try the roundels just because I felt it went well with the color scheme. But I did find that they kind of are a little bit annoying. So maybe use original beads. Maybe that's my pro tip. So again, I'm pulling that through a middle bead, that's the 6th bead, ignoring every other bead as part of that point, and it's just making this cute little border that I really love. I'm stringing my last one here, and to be honest, I didn't end up loving this the way I thought I would, so I went back afterwards and added a second layer of those roundels. I didn't get that on camera because I, didn't want it to be too confusing or anything, but if you feel so inclined, I just grabbed an extra string and put it through one of the beads that I just pointed to, the translucent purple one, and I just strung and sort of alternated in the opposite way that I did the very first time, so I could create 2 rows. But again, don't make it overcomplicated. Maybe I'll show that part one day, but again, I feel that's sort of overthinking it, and I probably should have just used the original beads, and I wouldn't have had to do that. So now I'm going to cut off the excess string, or the very excess string, because I still keep it kind of long, but I'm going to thread back through the original X base cuff so that I can begin tying my knots and being done. I do hide away my knots, as I've mentioned earlier. And what I mean by hiding them is I typically pull through some of the base cuff knots. So you'll see here that I'm pulling through one of these crystal pairs that I've deemed to be, hidden enough. I'm actually only pulling through one of the crystal beads and letting it sit between the two. And from there, I'm going to tie a knot in between those 2 beads. And that's what I consider to be, quote, hidden. You can tie it off wherever you want. Honestly, you don't even have to hide it if that feels annoying. It's just a personal thing I do. And any knot will suffice. I I personally call this knot that I'm using right here, like, the 4 knot, just because, like, the way that my fingers, like, hold it into, like, that weird funky 4 triangle thing. But really, any knot should do as long as it's sturdy enough. And if it isn't sturdy enough, maybe just try knotting it a couple times. Again, that's what I do. And then I also seal my knots with Mod Podge. Again, you really don't have to. I don't know if anybody else actually does that, but I feel like it keeps everything in place. It makes it so the string doesn't fray. Maybe that's my knowledge. Maybe that's my advice, my wisdom. But again, I'm showing you how many knots I've tied. Maybe like 6. Again, tie until you feel satisfied with how many knots you have. And I'm just trying it on. It's super cute. The roundels look a little funny, but I did fix that later before it goes up on my Etsy. But I hope it was helpful anyways. And I really enjoy making these tutorials, so let me know if you need help or if this was helpful.